instance, one t-shirt, maybe I don't know what t-shirts go for at concerts these days. They
Oh,
can be a lot. They can be a lot. But if you love that band or you love that artist, you're willing to pay it. You don't care what it costs. And that one t-shirt is probably the equivalent of thousands of streams on a streaming platform. This example of like patronage goes back centuries. So if you go back to the classical era, you have wealthy barons serving as patrons for composers like Mozart and Beethoven. Like these guys aren't able to make a living creating this beautiful art. But people see the value in it and they say, I want to help you eat so that you can keep making this wonderful music. And so, yeah, I think history shows and existing patterns show that there's plenty of reason to believe we can extend this sort of voluntary payment dynamic, this value dynamic, or this value model to music streaming.
hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Changing the Tide. I'm your host, John Crabtree, and extremely excited today. I have Michael Rhee of Wavlake. He is the founder of Wavlake and is a musician himself, so solving problems that he himself encounters, which most of the time is a way to really develop a product that not only has product market fit, but that takes off. So what Wavlake is, it allows musicians and artists to post songs, their music, and then to connect their node to the Wavlake node. And anyone listening can go on, make a charge of a certain amount of sats. Right now, the base level is set at 21 sats. They can do that, and that unlocks plays for the artist. And it is both tracking the sats that are streamed to the artist as well as how many plays, and that creates a ranking a la Billboard Top 40, for instance. But it's definitely based off of that old magazine approach, but now online and using Bitcoin on Lightning to create that top 40 list. So it's exciting stuff. Michael is fantastic. You're really going to love this conversation. Let's hop over to it. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. I'm
Yeah,
glad to be here.
glad for you to be here. I noticed you and caught a little bit of your time in the Voltage Twitter Spaces the other day. So it was cool to
Oh,
get
that's
a
great.
preview before we talked. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. As we get started, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Clark Moody Bitcoin dashboard in Amboss to get some stats here. So, Amboss, we are at a node count, public Lightning Network nodes. The count is 16,490, and there are 82,174 channels, and a little over 4,000 Bitcoin, 4,044.35 Bitcoin are active on Lightning Network. And fees have bumped back up. So if you're trying to uh, make a Bitcoin on-chain transaction or open a channel immediately, you're looking at about 18 sats per VByte. It's a little cheaper if you can wait a little bit longer. And then on the Clark Moody Bitcoin dashboard, we are over 5,000 sats per dollar. So 5,157 sats if you exchange a dollar on average across all the exchanges. We're starting today at block height 743,175. And we have just over 10,000 transactions in the mempool. So it's nice and busy this morning. So, okay, as we transition back here, Michael, tell us about this project you're working on, Wavlake.
Yeah, happy to. Wavlake is a music streaming platform that is built on Bitcoin and Lightning. The idea is that artists can publish their music on Wavlake and people can listen to it. And if they want, they can tip that artist in Bitcoin over the Lightning Network. And the concept behind this is multifaceted. The first is one, it allows artists to receive payments over Lightning and receive Bitcoin. And the other part of this is that it enables listeners to be able to support artists that they love and promote them in ways that might help increase that artist's visibility amongst other people who maybe have not discovered or haven't been exposed to that particular kind of music yet. So it's trying to strike a balance between helping artists earn a better form of money in return for their work and receive that money directly from their listeners and fans, and then also help listeners discover and support new music that they love.
That's really cool. So you're trying to, excuse me, you're trying to build up artists in general with, again, this better form of money. And also, if people haven't heard of them or their genre of music or whatever, uh, they may uh, they may learn about them through this platform.
Yeah, and I kind of modeled the homepage as it exists today behind classic music chart type websites, and I mean, back in the day, there used to be, people used to read magazines and weeklies with the charts on them. So it's kind of modeled after that, but it's modernized so that it's showing the top tracks on the site according to how many plays and how many tips they've received over some preceding window of time.
Ah, really interesting. Okay, yeah, because Billboard, obviously, and on it right now, top 40. I see the top 40. So right now, and rank number one, as I see it, is "Life on Mars" by, looks like, Nikki Havey,
Yeah.
um, and then so everything going down from there would be in descending order of how many sats that artist has received or been tipped.
Yeah, it's a combination of plays and sats, and the ranking is more heavily weighted. The sats are more heavily weighted in that ranking, but it is scored on a combination of those two factors.
Okay. Okay, so here's an interesting question then. Why Bitcoin on Lightning for music specifically? What are some of the problems that you're trying to solve for the music industry or artists, I should say, more generally?
Yeah, so that's a really complex answer or complex question to answer. I think where I would begin is with Lightning and Bitcoin itself. So the technology that we have today with Lightning, it's enabled this open, global, near instant payment network that allows people to transfer Bitcoin to one another with immediate settlement. That's never existed before. And so that's opened up this wide world of potential for entirely new kinds of services and platforms on the internet. And one example of that is a media platform like Wavlake. That was uh, my goal in creating this platform to leverage this monetary network that is so exciting and innovative. Um, and I think the main thing that it allows from a just practical standpoint is it enables these micropayments to just traverse the globe between individuals for any kind of value transfer that they deem fit. In this particular case, we're trying to enable listeners to be able to transfer value to music that they love, and in turn support those musicians to keep on creating that music. So I think we're just in the really early stages of figuring out what all this looks like when you layer this universal value system on top of what is already possible on the internet. And so that's the reason I created Wavlake, was to explore that potential and see if we could do things in a different way that potentially are more beneficial to the end consumers of music and then the artists creating it.
Yeah. Are you a musician yourself?
Yeah, I'm a huge music fan. I have played in a few bands over the years. I've put out a couple albums. I play the guitar. I can like find my way around a piano. Write songs, all that stuff. So I've been on the production side of it and the creative side. And I've had small successes, but nothing that nothing that I could support myself on ultimately. But in seeing the production side and the marketing side and the gigging side of music, it's an incredibly difficult business. It's an incredibly difficult endeavor, I should say. Um, when if the business side of it is just another complexity. And so I think I would love to help make the business side as efficient as possible so that we can enable more artists to be doing the work that they love and that they're meant to be doing without um, having to worry about scrounging for every single nickel and dime that they deserve.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, this might be a perfect time to transition into a chart that was put up by someone who works at Cash App on Twitter, and just showing the various like cents, fractions of dollars per stream that the various platforms, music platforms do. And Title seemed to be at the top of that list, which is another Block subsidiary company, at 1.3 cents per stream. And I thought to myself, it's far and above the others. The others, I think, are fractions of cent. But I thought to myself, is that really like something to celebrate? uh, ca- and and maybe so if someone's sending Bitcoin on Lightning. I don't know. Um, have you given any thought to that? Do you know some of those stats around what kind of compensation artists are getting?
So I'm not privy to the official statistics as far as royalty payments go for the various major streaming platforms that are out there. I think most of that is internal knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think that's one problem that I see with the streaming business as it exists today is that the models for payout are opaque and not clear to artists in terms of exactly how much one stream translates into in terms of payment. Um, so that's one issue. Another one is that these numbers that we're seeing are just estimates, so we can't really be sure exactly what's happening, and there is a range. And from the artist side, when they collect their payments from whatever service they're using to publish this music and distribute it out to the various streaming platforms, none of that data really comes in clearly or transparently either. So it's coming in a lump sum. You get some royalty check maybe months in arrears from when the actual plays happened. And so there just isn't a clear understanding of how much you're earning on a particular platform or in a particular region. It's all kind of bundled up within the platform itself. And then they do some math, and depending on contracts and support for their own infrastructure and their own platform, they then take a cut of all the ad revenue and the subscription revenue, and then they dole it out to the labels and the intermediaries and the service providers and ultimately the artists in the end. And it's I think whether 1.3 cents or 0.03 cents is the fair price for a particular stream, I can't say. I think, at scale, a listener shouldn't have to pay very much in order to make it worthwhile for an artist. Especially if lots of different people are adding micropayments to that artist's revenue. I think it is possible for that artist to make a decent amount off very cheap streams. But the question is, you know, no, like who is deciding how much all this costs, and what is fair in the end, especially when there are so many gatekeepers, and corporate entities and service providers and accounting organizations and all of that sort of standing in between the listener and the artist.
Yeah, the amount of trusted third parties between the person who's just enjoying the music and the person who's expecting compensation for creating the music is sounds just absolutely massive. So,
Yeah, and a lot of that is due to the nature of how the music industry has evolved over the last 100 years. I mean, recorded music is a relatively new phenomenon. And you know, there was a lot of capital and investment required in the early days to produce a recording, just to produce, a cylinder or a 45 and get that on the radio. I mean, think about all the technology and materials and expertise required to engineer and produce recordings 100 years ago. And so clearly there were capitalists and people who wanted to see this happen, and but they had to put some skin in the game and make a relatively big investment to see that music and make it, uh, hear let people hear it around the world. The dynamics and the economies of that have completely changed, though, especially in the last, say, 20, 30 years with the advent of digital production and then also the internet for distribution. But I think we still seem to be operating under that older model of corporate structures and very sort of capital heavy entities controlling and facilitating the production and distribution of music, when that doesn't necessarily help as much as it used to.
yeah, the amount of capital required in the analog recording world, especially in the beginning, which is true of any nascent, technology space, was yeah, absolutely massive. I'm sure. I mean, down to even creating the technology to also uh, to also play it, right? Not just the medium that let's say the record, for instance, right? Um, but then the actual playing device itself, and it transitioned into the digital age, where there's no longer even a, I guess maybe outside of the actual device that you're listening on, or a laptop or something like that. There's no real other hardware, right, to play it. And so, um, yeah, I think the digital age has changed everything, in massive ways. But especially music is a big one.
Yeah, and what I think is interesting, especially over the last decade or so, is this podcast revolution. I mean, this is a podcast right now, so this is a bit meta, but you know, in the last 10 years, we have gone from podcasts just being this strange new thing to basically being the main way that millions of people consume audio content. And what I think is fascinating is that all of that has been built on top of an open standard and foundation. And so all these podcasts that are out in the world are freely published, and anyone can go out and build a podcast player that consumes and indexes every single podcast available in the world. And people can pick and choose the player that they love, find the podcast that they need to, listen to any of those podcasts. And now, as we're evolving or developing this value for value model where listeners can stream Bitcoin to their favorite podcasts over some of these newer applications.
Mhm.
Now we're seeing even more innovation happening in the podcast space. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to the fact that it is built on these open standards. We don't have any equivalent to that in music. Music has still been locked into these centralized walled gardens. And practically speaking, the music streaming platforms that existed a decade ago are pretty much the same as we use today. And I think the one of the reasons for that may be the fact that that industry hasn't been able to innovate on an open network in the same way that podcasting has.
I was going to ask you if podcasting 2.0 had been a big just influence on your thinking here in music. So it sounds like it has.
Yeah, definitely. I think my first exposures to podcasting 2.0, the podcast index, some of the apps that were enabling Bitcoin streaming to podcast producers. I first was exposed to that a little over a year ago, and I thought it was incredible. And then my first instinct at the time was, okay, where can I find music? Where are people doing this for music? Um, and the fact of the matter was, not many people were doing it for music, which is one of the reasons I wanted to build Wavlake, which what was was because I could see the potential for this in music, and it was just a matter of someone trying it and sort of pushing up against what we already understood to be the normal streaming paradigm and
Mhm.
testing out some new ideas around it and seeing how people responded. And overall, the response has been incredible. And I've been able to meet artists from all over the world who are interested in this idea. And I think we're just at the beginning of exploring it and figuring out where exactly we could take this over the next 5, 10 years.
That's cool. I love the 5 to 10 year outlook. I mean, I think to myself around the way that I think the podcast index has already changed the tide, so to speak, in podcasting, and the types of conversations that can be had when you don't have to look over your shoulder at your advertisers, but you can actually provide discussions of value to people who are listening who want to give back to you directly. That's massive. Do you see a similar tailwind effect of that in music, such that musicians, rather than having to maybe be guided by a studio in the type of music they want to play, now they're free to choose what they want because someone else, the actual people are interested, who are interested are paying them.
Yeah, we already see some hints at this kind of a world existing today. So, podcasting 2.0 is one example. The fan club donation model is another, I think, really important example where people are altruistically sending financial support to the creators that they love. Video streamers, the same thing. So the model is out there for us to build on. And I think there's definitely potential to keep growing it. One of the things that I think about is the way that many artists for for decades have supported themselves through things like merchandise or album sales. And what's interesting about that is that for the most part, an artist's fans, only about 5 to 10% of people going to a concert, for example, are going to buy a T-shirt or a record. The majority go see the show, maybe have a drink and then go home. But only about 5-10% are gonna get that shirt to remember the concert. I mean, these are the diehards.
Yeah.
And I think that same dynamic exists today in podcasting 2.0, in websites like Patreon, where you have people who are really passionate about some creator and the thing that they're doing, and they're willing to go out on a limb voluntarily to support that artist because they want to see more of that thing. So I guess it's not purely altruistic. There is an incentive for the fan, but no one is forcing them to provide that financial support. And when you think about it, you know, in the concert example, for instance, one T-shirt, maybe it's I don't know what T-shirts go for at concerts these days. They
Oh
can be a
man.
lot. They can be a lot. But if you love that band or you love that artist, you're willing to pay it. You don't care what it costs. And that one T-shirt is probably the equivalent of thousands of streams on a streaming platform. Um, this example of like patronage goes back centuries. So if you go back to the classical era, you have wealthy barons serving as patrons for composers like Mozart and Beethoven. Like these guys aren't able to make a living creating this beautiful art. But people see the value in it and they say, I want to help you eat so that you can keep making this wonderful music. And so, yeah, I think history shows and and existing patterns show that there's plenty of reason to believe we can extend this sort of voluntary payment dynamic, this value dynamic, or this value model to music streaming.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, that's the interesting story of Mozart's existence is that he had a patron, and I think it was an archbishop or archduke, I forget. But then he was cut off from that patron and tried to freelance, and we all know what became of Mozart. After that, as a freelancer, which is what happens with a lot of musicians who go the freelance route. So it's cool to see the the platform like Wavlake, like what you're building, come about to try to fill that gap, and almost scale. Like the patronage system uh, relies on too many single points of failure, and I think what Lightning Network can bring is a global audience with a no single central point of failure. You can have thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of millions of people listening to you, um, and sending small amounts of Bitcoin, which can be game changing for artists.
Yeah, and another factor to consider is some of the regional restrictions on content with music today. So
Mm.
there's regional restrictions and there's also rights restrictions, like licensing rights restrictions. I don't know if you've ever noticed on one of your streaming platforms that you'll have an album, especially with things like compilations, one or two of the tracks are missing for some reason. That's usually due to some licensing restriction for that particular track. And that's all just tangled up in legal um, kind of challenges. But you know, I think it's an outdated model, especially for something that is so freely available, easily on the internet, to have these very antiquated restrictions on what people can listen to on certain platforms when we have this potential to have a global network of open music where people are freely sharing and freely supporting. um, I think that's a model we can move toward that'll be much better for everyone, especially in the realm of the creative world. I believe that art is meant to be open and shared and built on and remixed and repurposed, and all that does is um, you're creating this snowball effect where you can just continue to innovate and build on others' ideas. There's that famous Picasso quote, "Great art is steel," um, and I think as humans and as creative individuals, that's really what we do naturally. We see a good idea and it inspires us to build something else, and so on and so forth. And I think, this gets a bit idealistic, I realize, but I'm a bit of a dreamer. And so I think that changing the music industry and the streaming business in this way that's more open could be really beneficial, not only from a financial standpoint, but just also a creative and imaginative standpoint.
Yeah, the freedom to express oneself freely, you know, in artistic ways, advances, I think, societal discussions in ways that just talking cannot accomplish. I think art has been behind many social movements, um, and art has been a centerpiece to help make changes for both positive and negative, for the good and for the ill. But nonetheless, if there's no freedom to do that, the good to the good doesn't happen necessarily as quickly as it needs to. So
Yeah, ideas are important. I think ideas are important to share. It's how we learn, it's how we grow as a society. Um, and I think, you know, going back to this idea that content, needs to be controlled in order for artists to earn their fair share. I think we've been conditioned a little bit into believing that. That we went through this period in the late '90s when the internet was just catching on, and then we had this thing called Napster come out, and there were all these other file sharing peer-to-peer applications that came out shortly afterwards, and everyone was just throwing MP3s around left and right, and you could
that
find
was me.
anything. Yeah, I was there too, and I discovered so much new music from that, from those applications, and then obviously it was quickly shut down. On the one hand, it was great for music discovery, just finding random things that you would never think to look for. And it wasn't none of it was sort of guided by an algorithm or some sort of a centralized entity. Download you could like find a peer that had one good album you found, and then you could be like, oh, what else does this person have? And then find all this other random stuff. Um, and then they shut that down because, to be fair, it wasn't really a great deal for the artists, for people to just be um, copying and sharing music willy nilly. That wasn't the best deal, so I can understand why we shut it down. But then we came back around to this idea where we said, okay, well, the corporations are going to control the content again. We're going to lock it behind paywalls. We're going to sell you MP3s. We're going to watermark them so we know if you share them. And then we evolved from that, and that got a little expensive. And I don't know if it made a whole lot of sense to pay $1 for an MP3 that someone could manufacture and copy essentially for free ad infinitum. Um, and then we evolved to the streaming model where we didn't own music anymore. We sort of paid for access. Um, and that seemed like a really good idea at the time. You pay $10 a month, you have access to basically every song on the planet. That seemed pretty great. Um, but I think what we're starting to see in the streaming world, and we're definitely well into with like TV and movie streaming, is we're going back to square one, where these platforms are saying, well, we have this exclusive content. If you want it, you're gonna have to get another subscription. And
Hmm.
you can see the sort of beginnings of that happening with the music streaming industry and podcasting as well, where people are trying to get a little bit more possessive about the content on their platform. And ultimately, all of us kind of lose in that world where if I want to hear this great thing, all right, okay, so I have to sign up for that service now. And then if I want to hear this other thing, I have to sign up for this other service. So, you know, I think to their credit, uh, the corporations have done a great job convincing us that this is the way we need to go for artists to get fairly compensated. Um, but if you look at the numbers, artists are still not really benefiting from this system. Clearly, it works for the companies, but not the creators. And yeah, I think it's time to revisit and rethink this entire streaming model. With now that we have the experience and the evidence that we could be doing a little bit better.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. This is going to be good for the artist, but actually, it's good for lining our pockets as the the corporation. Um, Michael, how does it work then? Do artists just upload to the platform their music? Do they establish a Lightning wallet by doing that? Say I'm an artist. How do I
Yeah.
get started?
Yeah. So Wavlake right now is in this alpha release mode where I was basically just testing out a theory, and that is, what would music on Lightning look like? And in order to test this theory, I built a really kind of rapid prototype, launched it, and then started signing up artists who were interested in trying it out. As it stands today, Wavlake has a few problems. And these are things that I've learned over the last year of building it and working with artists. Um, Currently, as it exists today, if you're familiar with Lightning nodes,
Hmm.
um, you can run your own, and it allows an artist to register their Lightning node to Wavlake, and then publish some music on Wavlake. And if someone wants to tip that artist, the tip will go directly to that artist's node.
Mm.
You can also register a Lightning address enabled wallet, so something like Joe at so and so.com, that points to some Lightning server somewhere. Um, that is also possible on Wavlake. But all of that is kind of a challenge for a lot of people. Um, and it's not to, you know, criticize or um, say that people aren't able to do this. It's just complicated, and there's a lot of challenges that go into not only running your own node, but understanding all of these underpinnings of Bitcoin and Lightning. And I've talked to artists who aren't familiar with Bitcoin at all, and who essentially are starting at square one, and are interested in the technology and using a tool like it, but have no idea where to begin. And as you're probably familiar, as am I, it takes a long time to sort of grasp all of the various concepts that encompass the Bitcoin universe.
Hmm.
Um, and so, what we're trying to do with Wavlake now is improve that experience. So make it super easy and simple for any artist, whether you're familiar with Bitcoin or not, whether you run your own node or not, to be able to onboard music onto an open platform that enables them to receive Bitcoin streamed to them by listeners who like the music. And so it's similar to the podcasting 2.0 mechanic, um, but essentially just applying that to music.
That's cool. Yeah, I heard Dave and Adam on a recent podcast index or podcasting 2.0 board meeting, their weekly podcast talk about. They had an in-depth conversation around music, and obviously, Adam Curry being an MTV VJ, music's been a huge part of his life. Dave Jones himself, he is an artist as well, has played gigs and loves music. So they both are really interested in that. So it's very cool um, that you're kind of like working on it, and that you started from, hey, artists, connect your node to ours. When people stream sats, it goes directly to your node. But as you note, uh, not node, as you note, this it can be difficult, especially for people who don't have any priors, or they're just getting used to Bitcoin and Lightning, and so this is all very new, and they have no node, or they may not trust themselves to set one up. So
Yeah, and
so
I have to give a lot of credit to Adam and Dave and the rest of the Podcast Index team. I think they've done amazing things with Podcasting 2.0, with hardening the specification for metadata tagging in the RSS feeds. And yeah, I'm interested in working with them as well, to flesh out what music could look like using that model.
that's cool. Yeah, I'm very thankful, because one of the things, it was several episodes into my podcast, but I had on Oscar Mary from Fountain, and he helped me get set up really quickly on Fountain and Breeze. And I've received Satoshis through both of those services just for the shows that I produce with guests. And now I'm splitting those sats with guests. So any sats that get streamed here, Michael will have to get your node pub key or a lightning address and get you some sats. But it's very cool because I've been able to, now I'm very early in the game, and I don't have sponsors, but I would like to remain that way as long as possible, because I'd like to talk about, I'd like to allow my guests and have conversations with guests that I'm not looking over my shoulder, at, can I say this? Am I allowed to? So I'm very thankful for the work they're doing and all the work that the app builders are doing. Castamatic is another fan favorite, Podverse, which I think is not, that's a project that comes not far from where you are located as well. So now
Yeah,
for me, I'm
I was
sorry.
just sorry. I was gonna say it's an exciting time to be trying these new ways of supporting yourself and supporting your creative work. Yeah, I think you know one of the really surprising things, that I found when working with artists is that after they hook up their node and they start receiving Bitcoin from listeners, they're pretty excited about it. Like, and it's not a large amount, but it's enough to be motivated by. And so I think that's another aspect of this whole value network and this value model of media streaming, is that when you receive Bitcoin from listeners for work that you're doing, that's a really positive feedback loop as an artist and a creator, to motivate you to keep on doing what you're doing. It's a signal, it's a very strong signal from someone somewhere out there in the world saying, keep doing what you're doing. I dig it. And I think there's nothing really that exists like that today. I mean, you have the fan club models, that allow people to subscribe and support you sort of separately from the work that you're doing. They're just kind of on these separate channels. Like, all right, I'll give you some money on this side so that you can do the thing on here, whether it's a video stream or a podcast or an album. But with these direct instantaneous payments over Lightning, you can merge all of that together into a single channel. And I think that aspect is incredibly exciting. And but the potential of that is, I think, still largely unknown. We're still just scratching the surface of this and figuring out what this is going to look like. But that's fun and exciting.
It is being really at the very beginning point because everyone talks about there will be a day where you can't exchange your fiat money for Bitcoin. Some people speculate that, and that may be true. And if that does come to fruition, then what happens is, in order to get Bitcoin, you have to earn it as the currency that you're
Mm.
earning in. And so what these projects are doing, including yours, is giving us a really early taste of that, and
Yeah.
it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the interoperable nature of Bitcoin and Lightning all the time, and how seamless all of these interactions are between Lightning enabled applications. So you have all these podcast players, and you can load Bitcoin onto them, and they can stream Bitcoin out to a podcaster like yourself. You can then take that wallet, go to some other service like Wavlake, or you could go to something like Stacker News and start, load that wallet up and interact with the website in that way. And then take that same Bitcoin and go to some other service. Maybe you want to go to Bitrefill and get a gift card. I think a lot of people see that exit route right now as
Mm.
kind of the viable or the practical endpoint of that loop, or it's not a loop, of that sort of semicircle where the Bitcoin is traversing these services, and then in the end, okay, I can turn it into something, using a gift card, for example. I'll exit. That's when I exit the network, right?
Hmm.
Um, but
Right.
yeah, I think it is perfectly reasonable to assume there will come a day that that loop is a complete circle, and you will be able to just take that Bitcoin and buy a cup of coffee with it, or whatever it is you need to do. And at that point, you know, the circle's closed, the circle's complete. Um, and who knows what that world looks like, but yeah, it could be incredibly interesting.
It could be. I'm guessing that might be some of the sentiment of your tweet from a couple weeks ago. As down as it is, I'm guessing you're talking in price. I still don't see a day when people stop using this crazy thing called Bitcoin. There remains nothing else like it
Yeah,
because
I
it could
stand by
enable
I
that.
stand by that. Yeah, I totally stand by that. There's I mean, it's native internet money, and we've never seen a world with something like this before. I don't know where it's going. The price is incredibly unpredictable, so it makes it harder to use as a practical everyday currency. But it's worth something to people. And I think, you know, as someone who uses Bitcoin myself, knowing that there's other people who also use it, and the fact that this is open to anyone in the world to use, that's kind of all you need. No one, this Satoshi didn't create Bitcoin to make people use it.
Yes.
Satoshi created Bitcoin because this is just something we can opt in to use if we think it's worthwhile. And from that perspective, the price of it in dollars or euro or whatever is kind of an afterthought. And in a way, it's a distraction because if you're going to continue to see the world and view Bitcoin through the lens of how much it's worth in this older system, in this legacy system, you're failing to see the intrinsic value of it in itself, and you'll always be looking at it through that distorted lens. So yeah, the price is important, but I think the quicker we move away from focusing on it as the definition of Bitcoin's value, I think the better it will be for everyone.
Yeah. Take off your fiat beer goggles and see clearly, see Bitcoin clearly for what it is. Maybe just to wrap up one question here, and I think you probably mentioned this a little bit, but what are some potential speed bumps for the growth of Bitcoin in general and Lightning in particular? Maybe some that you've seen. Is it really just the like how to connect a node or get the right service to accept it?
Yeah.
What have you seen?
I think just from a very practical standpoint, many people, most people in the world are highly skeptical of Bitcoin for a variety of reasons. Um, and you and I know the list of critiques against Bitcoin. Um, and I think that's really just kind of an intellectual hurdle. I think that's really the biggest challenge, is that people are just skeptical about it, and the fact that Bitcoin exists in this larger umbrella of cryptocurrencies in general, which, as we've seen in the last, I mean, 10 years basically,
Hmm.
the cryptocurrency landscape is rife with fraud, and scams, and so Bitcoin just gets lumped in with that, unfortunately and unfairly.
Yeah.
And so I think that intellectual hurdle is the biggest challenge to adoption. I think a lot of the technology is already there. It works. I think it still needs improvement. It still needs to be worked on, but practically speaking, it does work. Um, and this is another reason why I think pricing Bitcoin in dollars or euro or whatever other currency, um, can be uh, can work against it in some ways because it gets in the way of having true price discovery. And I know we're
Mm.
doing that in sort of fiat terms on a daily basis, but if we're going to get to a point where like I understand what 1,000 satoshis means in my everyday life, um, we're gonna have to get past the, well, what is it equal to in dollars at some point. And this is another kind of uh, I guess experiment that I'm interested in seeing play out on Wavlake, for example. I started setting the price per play to 21 sats
That's
just
cool.
as an experiment. So like a tip is 21 sats by default, and then you can create multiples of that depending on how much you want to tip an artist. But just as a mile marker, setting it at 21 sats.
Mhm.
Um, and my thinking behind it was, one, I mean, 21 obviously has some relevance to Bitcoin, but also I just wanted to see, like, let's say I just left it 21 sats for years and this thing kept growing. You know, what would 21 sats be worth in 10 years? I have no idea. But I think like that's where, I think that's where people who are unfamiliar with Bitcoin, um, might see the most kind of or have the most potential to change their minds about it. Because if you have like a dollar in one hand and you have 5,000 sats in another, if I can go to the store and that dollar buys a little less at the store tomorrow or a month from now or a year from now. And then I have this 5,000 sats and I go to the store and like for whatever reason, like the thing keeps costing less, like a fewer number of sats every time I go to the store. So, I mean, there's no essay or podcast or movie
Mhm.
or documentary you can make that will get someone to understand that intuitively. Um, and so, yeah, I think we have a long way to go. But slowly and surely, I think as we build this technology out, as we build more practical use around it, um, yeah, I think people will come around.
Yeah. Within CR, integrating Lightning into its point of sale devices and you being able to walk into Whole Foods, probably imminent, very soon this year is supposedly when it's supposed to happen. Um, People will be able to see that experimentation happening real time. They'll be able to see the results of that experimentation, I should say.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
it'll be interesting. I mean, in the short term, who like it could go, it could go in the opposite direction that would be favorable to Bitcoin, obviously. But I think yeah, in the longer term, assuming the economic theory is right,
yep,
um, yeah, I think people will start to understand the value of it.
that's cool. Well, Michael, I'm so appreciative of you spending some time with me here this morning. Appreciate it. Where can people find you, Wavlake? Plug away.
Oh, yeah, no, thank you for having me. It's been a great chat. I hope you and others found it valuable. You can find me on Twitter at Rheedio. It's Rheedio. And then Wavlake is at wavlake.com, Wavlake.com.
Cool. And is radio a play on words on radio, which you used to spend time on?
Yeah, it's a bad pun, but yes.
Well, cool. Well, thanks again.
Thank you, John.
Man, what a wealth of knowledge Michael gave there. And I'm just very excited and extremely bullish on this project. And the fact that he's brought on Sam from the Lightning Store just today, as of this recording, he published a Medium article, which I will put in the show notes, about how Sam has joined as an advisor. Sam has a musical background. Some of his tracks are featured on Wavlake, and he makes awesome merch, Bitcoin merch. So there's the limited edition Thunder t-shirt that was on last fall in collaboration with Jack Everett. And so I just have this great feeling about where Wavlake is going. I think solving the content creation problem, this is a fantastic new service that is somewhat modeled after the old magazine style of service, right? The Billboard magazine style of service to surface popular music, to surface music that people should listen to. But that was very much recording company and label led, and this is really a ground up approach that allows for artists to opt in and essentially be their label, be their marketing. It's an open platform that their music is their marketing, and they are saying to the listener, please, if you like what you hear, um, Synsats unlock more plays, and I think it's going to be a really interesting solution for content creators to be paid more for, maybe open up the scaling, I should say. Um, Maybe this is a new way to scale beyond like the concert concept, right? Of touring, which is a grueling process. And it's a grueling way to make money, but it's the one that musicians have been forced into. Well, what if you don't have the freedom to do that? Say you have a family and you don't want to sacrifice the well being of um, spouse and your children, or your significant other and your children. This could be a way to open up to a global audience. And so then also allow a more global audience who may not have had someone um, tour in their area, or they may not have had they may not have easy access to music, either music of certain styles is banned in their country, or there just aren't enough music stores close by that they could access. Well, now if they are able to just hop on to wavlake.com, they can actually listen to that music. So what this is going to unlock, like Michael kept saying, we're only at the very beginning here. And so of Bitcoin on Lightning and what it can do. And so this is a fun, unique service that I know will continue to morph. Right now it's based off the old model, the old magazine model. But I imagine as it goes through its iterations, we're going to start seeing something completely different, because magazines as a medium have limited power compared to the internet as a medium. And having to physically pay in store or online for music magazine, and then also for the music itself, those have been combined into one, and there is one global money that can be used instantly that also pays the artist instantly. That's the incredible piece. Commission checks have always taken a certain amount of time between the actual production and publishing, so that's why there were advances like there are in the book industry. But then you have to make that amount of money back, at least the advance. And so in this case, you advance your music and you can see instantaneous returns. I'm just selling for Michael here, but the ideas of knowing how the music industry has been versus what it can be, I can see why Sam joined. And Michael, as a musician himself, knowing the problems that artists see, is creating this. And so artists can feel really good about using a service that's built by an artist for the current problems that musical artists in specific, see out there in the market. One thing I want to call out is a listener who is going to have access to the 2,500 sats from my BitRamp voucher creator powered by Azteco. Also is going to win 50,000 sats here. So that was at the Magic Carp. Left no boostagram, but streamed some sats to both me and Jesse of Amboss for session 24, where we talked about Amboss as a Lightning Network explorer and now as a liquidity marketplace via their Magma solution. So if you haven't checked that one out, go give it a listen. Super excited. Thank you at the Magic Carp. Your sats will be on their way. Hopefully I can find you on Twitter as well. I'll see if Oscar and Nick can find you to send you the voucher as well. All right. If you do like the show, if you thought this was enlightening, interesting, please feel free to like and subscribe on, subscribe on Fountain and Breeze. You can show that you like by actually streaming sats for the value that you feel you got in return. So that's what is powering this podcast currently, is value for value. I'm trying to bring some of the best minds who are trying to make major change in using Bitcoin and Bitcoin on Lightning. And that takes time, it takes energy. So I hope I'm providing some value. Please show that value in return if you feel like you've gotten it. You can do that on both Fountain and Breeze. I also like to shout out Castamatic and Podverse as well. Castamatic probably has the best UI user interface of all of them, especially when it comes to actually loading with sats, and it's just slick. Fountain has a clipping feature, which is fantastic. Breeze has everything, which you'll find on the next session that I recording with Roy Scheinfeld, CEO and co-founder of Breeze. But then Castamatic, just an incredible UI. Podverse, all open source. I think they might be the first one to have integrated live video podcasting. So Mitch over there is doing some awesome work as well. And any of the boosting, downloading, liking, or subscribing, I should say, even across Apple, Google, and the legacy platforms as well is huge. I'm also over on Bitcoin TV. Okay, keep stacking away. Go support Wavlake, check it out, and we'll see you on the next one with Roy.